February 16th, 1990. The New York Post puts 6 words on its front page, and America decides it knows exactly who Marla Maples is. Best sex I've ever had. She says she never said it. 28 years later, she told a reporter someone else did. By then, she'd signed a document handed to her 5 days before her wedding. $1 million, a confidentiality clause, and a 5-year clock. He separated from her in month 41. She has never told her side. She still can't. And she's the only one who knows it. It begins on a ski slope. But hold on the headline for a second, because that front page is doing more work than anyone gave it credit for at the time. The words appeared under a photograph of Donald Trump. The full deck read that Marla was boasting to her pals about Donald. Not an interview, not a statement. A boast, secondhand attributed to a 26-year-old actress from North Georgia who had not yet given a single on-the-record interview about him. Trump was still married to Ivana. The divorce was 3 weeks into becoming the loudest tabloid story in New York, and this was the moment Marla Maples stopped being a name in a gossip column and became a punchline with a face. In 2018, reporting for jury duty in Manhattan, she was asked about it directly by Page 6. Her answer was flat and unambiguous. She never said that. Someone else said that. Then she added something stranger and more interesting, which we'll come back to. There is one other account of where those words came from, and it needs a warning label. Jill Brooke, a former Post journalist, wrote in 2018 that she had been in the room during a phone call in which Trump was pitching the paper's editor, Jerry Nachman, on a front page. That Nachman explained a cover requires murder, money, or sex, and that Trump immediately supplied the line himself, then called across the room for Marla to confirm it. Brooke says she heard a faint yes in the background. That recollection surfaced 28 years after the fact, from a single witness in a guest column. Treat it as what it is, one person's memory, not a document. What's not in dispute is the reaction inside Trump's own company. Barbara Rez, who ran construction for him and had no reason to invent a flattering story about the Post, later recalled that the executives thought the headline was awful, worried about the children who could read newspapers, and that he thought it was terrific. So the first sentence the American public ever heard from Marla Maples may not have been hers, and the man it flattered may have been the one who moved it. Keep that structure in mind. It repeats. She was not a starlet who wandered into this. She was a very specific kind of American product. Marla Ann Maples was born in October 1963 in Cohutta, Georgia, a town so small it barely qualifies as one. Her mother, Ann, had modeled. Her father, Stanley Edward Maples, was a real estate developer, a county commissioner, and a songwriter, and a 1990 Vanity Fair profile described him as a deacon in the Baptist church. Add that up. She grew up in a house where the family business was selling property, the family reputation was maintained in public office, the family faith was performed in front of a congregation every Sunday, and her father wrote songs. She was homecoming queen at Northwest Whitfield High in Tunnel Hill in her senior year. Class secretary, basketball. She went to the University of Georgia, then came north. Her first real film credit in 1986 was a part in Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive, where she is credited essentially as a woman who screams. None of that is destiny, but it means she arrived in New York already fluent in something most aspiring actresses were not: the difference between what a family is and what a family looks like from the pew. She understood staging before she understood Manhattan. There's one more detail from these years, and it comes from later reporting rather than from her. So hold it loosely. In Confidence Man, Maggie Haberman writes that Maples traveled with a wedding dress, so that if Trump ever decided the moment had arrived, she'd be ready. It's a secondhand image of a woman waiting on another person's timing. File it. It pays off in a way nobody intended. Now Aspen. Over Christmas of 1989, the Trumps were skiing in Colorado, and so was Marla. That was not a coincidence, and it had not been one for some time. Exactly how long the relationship had been running is genuinely unsettled. Accounts have placed the first contact anywhere from the mid-1980s to 1989, and the people best positioned to know have every incentive to shade the date in different directions. What's solid is what happened on the mountain. Ivana confronted her. Ivana's own version, published in her 2017 memoir, has the encounter happening in front of her children at lunch. She's an interested witness writing nearly 3 decades later, but the collision itself was reported at the time and never seriously denied by anyone. Liz Smith broke the marriage story in New York, and from there it stopped being a private matter and became a circulation event. The tabloids ran it for months. Trump's daughter Ivanka later wrote that a reporter asked her, as a small child, whether Marla's claims were true. Here's the part the standard telling gets backwards. Marla Maples is usually described as a nobody who got famous by accident, dragged into the spotlight by a scandal she couldn't control. Look at what actually happened to her visibility over the next 24 months and ask who was steering. She was on the cover of newspapers she'd never spoken to. She was on television constantly. In 1991, she turned up at WrestleMania as a celebrity timekeeper and played herself on designing women. That's not the trajectory of someone hiding. That's the trajectory of someone being deployed. And the timing matters, because 1990 was the worst year of Donald Trump's professional life. The Taj Mahal opened in Atlantic City in April 1990 and started failing almost immediately. Within 2 years, he'd been through casino bankruptcies, surrendered the Trump shuttle, given up his yacht, and lost his stake in the Plaza Hotel. His bankers put him on a personal allowance. The man who spent the decade selling himself as the most successful person in America was, in a technical sense, insolvent, and the only asset that hadn't lost value was his name in the papers. He got married to Ivana in a business, and the split cost him roughly $14 million, plus the Connecticut estate and $650,000 a year in child support. Remember that number. It explains almost everything about what came next. They got engaged in 1991. He gave her a 7.45-carat emerald-cut diamond from Harry Winston. That ring is going to come back, and when it does, it will not be romantic. Then nothing happened. For 2 years. They broke up and reconciled and broke up again, in public, with the tabloids keeping score. She took the only significant independent job of her adult life in August 1992, joining the Broadway cast of the Will Rogers Follies as Ziegfeld's favorite. He talked her up to the Washington Post before she went on, saying he thought she'd be great and that it took guts. That sounds supportive. Hold it against something he said on national television 18 months later, and it curdles. What broke the stalemate was not a decision he made about her. Tiffany Ariana Trump was born on October 13, 1993, in Florida. Marla was 29, Trump was 47, and he had just finished the most expensive divorce in the history of New York gossip. The version Marla has told publicly is that the Long Island Railroad shooting that December shook him, that it made him reconsider what mattered, and that the proposal came out of that. It's a humane story, and she may believe it completely. The reporting says something colder was operating alongside it. According to Vanity Fair's account of this period, his parents, Terrence, Fred, and Mary Trump, who did not do scandal, were angry that he had fathered a child outside of marriage, and he was preparing to take his casino business public, which meant walking into rooms full of institutional investors, while his personal life was still running on the front page of the Post every other week. A wedding solved a public relations problem and a family problem in a single afternoon. Vanity Fair reports that he asked his mother what he should do about Marla. That is not a man in love asking for a blessing. That is a man asking for a recommendation. He decided to marry her. 1,000 invitations went out for the Plaza Ballroom on December 20. And then, 5 days before the wedding, with the guests already booked and the press already alerted, a document arrived. We know what was in it because a copy eventually reached a reporter. In 2019, Vanity Fair's Gabriel Sherman published an account of the 1993 prenuptial agreement, based on a copy given to him by someone with access to it, including the confidential financial statements attached. The terms are not complicated. If they separated within 5 years, she got $1 million, plus another $1 million to buy a house. Child support for Tiffany was set at $100,000 a year, running until she turned 21, and terminating early if the child got a full-time job, enlisted in the military, or joined the Peace Corps. She surrendered any claim on his future wealth. And there was a confidentiality provision, an unusually thorough one, barring her from ever publishing any diary, memoir, letter, story, photograph, interview, article, essay, account, or depiction of any kind whatsoever, whether fictionalized or not, concerning the marriage. Read that list again. Whether fictionalized or not, he didn't just close the front door. He closed the novel. She had asked for $25 million. She has said publicly that the document was placed in front of her 5 days before the wedding. A source close to her told Vanity Fair she caved 24 hours before the ceremony and described her position plainly. She was under duress. and his position was that without the prenup, there was no wedding. Then there's the arithmetic buried in the financial disclosures, which is where the whole thing turns from cheap into deliberate. In that document, Trump valued himself at $1.17 billion. Marla listed $100,000 in the bank. He did not appear on the Forbes billionaires list at any point from 1990 through 1995. He had just lost the casinos, the airline, the yacht, and the plaza. Sherman's point about that inflated number is sharp and worth sitting with. If he had understated his wealth, she'd have had grounds later to argue he'd concealed assets and void the agreement. By overstating it, he made the contract harder to break. The vanity and the legal strategy were the same act. And how did she explain signing it? She told a journalist that they had basically come to an agreement that for the first few years they'd agree on something and then tear it up. Nobody tore anything up. The wedding was magnificent, and the guest list tells you who it was for. Roughly 1,000 people filled the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a building Trump owned, or at least still had his name on, and would surrender within 2 years. Marla wore Carolina Herrera. There had already been a press conference for the marriage license, hosted by Mayor David Dinkins. Champagne opened for the cameras. The bride was 2 months postpartum and 1 day past, signing away her financial claim on the man she was about to marry. Howard Stern was there. A New York Times reporter asked him what he thought, and Stern said it was probably in bad taste, but he'd give it 4 months. He was off by about 3.5 years, and he was the most accurate guest in the room. We also now know, from photographs published by CNN in 2025, that Jeffrey Epstein walked through the plaza that night and appears grinning in the background of a group shot with other guests. State it and move on. It's a fact about the room, not about the marriage. What the marriage actually looked like from inside is harder to reconstruct, because the person who lived it signed a contract promising never to describe it. But you can read the shape of it from what she was permitted to do. She had been a working actress. She'd been on Broadway 5 months before the wedding. After the wedding, the independent career effectively ends. What replaces it is employment inside the family business. She and Trump did a cameo together on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air in 1994. She co-hosted the Miss Universe pageant in 1996 and 1997, and Miss USA in 1997, pageants her husband owned. That's not a career. That's a job at your husband's company where the product is your husband's brand. And on March 10th, 1994, less than 3 months into the marriage, he explained the arrangement on national television, sitting beside her. The interview was with Nancy Collins for ABC's Primetime Live. Asked about the women in his life, he said he loved creating stars, that to a certain extent he'd done it with Ivana and to a certain extent with Marla, and that he liked that. Then, unfortunately, after they're a star, the fun is over for him. It's a creation process, he said, almost like creating a building. He compared his wives to real estate, on camera, in the first year. On the subject of her working, he said he had days when he thought it was great, and days when, while flagging that he didn't want to sound too much like a chauvinist, he went through the roof if he came home and dinner wasn't ready. He also volunteered the broader theory that putting a wife to work is a very dangerous thing, and that it was the single greatest cause of what happened with Ivana. Set that against him telling the Washington Post 2 years earlier that it took guts for her to go on that Broadway stage and that she'd be great. Both statements are real. The difference is that one was made while he was still deciding whether to marry her, and one was made after. She sat there while he said it. That's the part of this story that never made a headline, and it's the part that does the most damage. There was a man who repeatedly explained, in public, on the record, in front of her, exactly what she was for, and a woman who had, by contract, no ability to publish a word of response. The Robin Leach interview from the same period is the one people have actually seen, because it resurfaced in 2016 and it's genuinely hard to watch. Leach, doing a Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous segment, asks Trump which features the baby inherited from each parent. Trump says she's got a lot of Marla, that she's a beautiful baby, that she's got Marla's legs. Then he gestures toward his own chest and says, they don't know whether she's got this part yet, but time will tell. The baby was 1 year old. And here is where an honest account has to slow down, because the descent was not a straight line, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. There were good years in the middle of this. Mar-a-Lago opened as a club in 1995, and the family had a life in Palm Beach. There are photographs of the three of them that do not look staged. Trump has said, and there's no reason to doubt this specific claim, that she stuck by him during the early 90s when things were genuinely bad, and things were genuinely bad. He told Howard Stern right after the divorce that she was a good person, that they'd had a great time, and that she was there when he was going through the worst of it. That's the most generous thing he ever said about her publicly, and he said it in 1999 when it cost him nothing. She was also, by several accounts, better at reading people than the family gave her credit for. According to Wall Street Journal reporting drawing on Mar-a-Lago staff recollections, Maples told employees there was something wrong with Epstein, that something was off about him, and made clear she didn't want him around her or her husband. She reportedly raised it with the man running security at Trump's Florida properties. These are staff memories recounted decades later, so hold them at that weight. But if they're accurate, the woman everyone treated as decorative was the first person in that house to say it out loud. None of that saved the marriage. What it does is explain why leaving wasn't obvious. Then came April 16th, 1996, and this is the incident that gets cited constantly and understood almost never. There is a Palm Beach police incident report from that date. An officer working a deserted beach around 4 a.m, roughly 10 minutes from Mar-a-Lago, found a man concealed under a lifeguard stand. The report identifies him as one of Trump's bodyguards, Spencer Wagner. Marla Maples came out from the dark. That is the document. Everything stacked on top of it is a different category of thing entirely. Her explanation was that Wagner was driving her home from a party, she needed a bathroom, and she'd gone onto the beach. The National Enquirer, which got the story from the officer, ran it as a scandal. Trump fired Wagner months later. Wagner then sold an account to the Globe in which he claimed they'd been intimate, a paid tabloid interview, which is the least reliable form of testimony that exists. Years afterward, his ex-wife told Inside Edition that in private he always denied it, insisted nothing happened, and that the accusation wrecked his working life. So, one police report and 3 incompatible stories on top of it, 2 of which were sold, and 1 of which was told for free. I'm not going to pretend to resolve it, because it can't be resolved on this evidence. What matters is what the incident was worth to the person who didn't need it resolved. It handed Trump something he had not previously had, a publicly circulating reason to end the marriage that had nothing to do with him. He didn't use it right away. He waited more than a year. And when he finally moved, in May of 1997, the timing wasn't emotional at all. It was a calendar. The prenup ran on a 5-year horizon. Under 5 years, the payout was the fixed $1 million, plus the $1 million for a house. Past 5 years, the terms shifted from a flat number to a percentage of what he was worth. They married on December 20th, 1993. The separation was announced in May 1997. That's month 41, with 19 months to spare. We don't have to guess at the motive, and that's the astonishing part. Sources close to Trump told The New Yorker at the time that the split had been timed precisely to stay under the 5-year mark, and one of them explained the stakes in the plainest possible terms, that if it went from a fixed amount to a percentage, even a small percentage of a very large number is a lot of money. So they were talking about very huge things. Another source told the New York Times it would be a huge mistake to do otherwise, that unless you're married to someone you have total certainty about, you just can't do that. Maggie Haberman, in Confidence Man, makes the point that finishes it. Those quotes were anonymously placed by Trump and his lawyers. They were not a leak. They were a message. Sit with the sequence. He ended a marriage, then arranged for reporters to be told that he ended it to protect his money, while his wife of 3.5 years was legally barred from responding in any form whatsoever. That's the answer to the title. Not the affair rumors, not the tabloids. The nastiness is on paper, and he put it there himself, and then he had it read aloud to the press. In October of that same year, he published Trump, The Art of the Comeback, ghostwritten by Kate Boner and turned in 8 hours before deadline. In it, he explained both of his divorces. Ivana talked too much about work. Marla wanted him home earlier. Sadly, like so many couples these days, they drifted apart. Both ex-wives denied his accounts. Only one of them was legally free to publish a rebuttal, and it wasn't Marla. The divorce was finalized on June 8, 1999. She received roughly $2 million, half of it earmarked for buying a home, plus the child support. The confidentiality obligation survived intact. Then she did something that has been almost entirely misread for 25 years. That autumn, London's Daily Telegraph published an interview with her. In it, she said the marriage had been built on an illusion. She said Donald was never the man she wanted to marry. She said she'd finally found the courage to walk away and stay away, and that after she became a mother, she was less willing to put up with his behavior. The Telegraph also quoted her describing him as driven by ego. Within days, a spokeswoman for Maples said the interviewer had taken quotes out of context, without ever specifying which ones. Look at the mechanics of that, because it's the first time in the whole story she runs the play herself. The statement is out. It's printed. It's in every American paper by way of the New York Post. And there is a formal disavowal on the record that names nothing and retracts nothing. She got the sentence into the world and kept a defensible position on the contract. In 2000, she took the 7.45-carat Harry Winston ring, the engagement stone from 1991, the one he'd chosen, and put it up for auction. It sold for about $110,000. She gave part of the proceeds to charity. She had signed away the future wealth, the memoir, the interview, the diary, the photographs, the essay, whether fictionalized or not. She had not signed away the ring. So she sold it, publicly, and gave the money to strangers. The books never happened. In 2001, a manuscript called All That Glitters Is Not Gold was set for publication and then quietly abandoned by both Maples and the publisher. Years later, according to page 6, there was another attempt, a project called It's About Time, with Judith Regan prepared to publish, and it reportedly died because Trump would not sign off. Treat the details of that second one as trade gossip. Treat the pattern as established. 2 manuscripts, 0 books, which means the surviving written account of that marriage, the one in libraries, is the one written by him in 8 hours in 1997, in which they drifted apart. Understand what that actually accomplishes. Ivana wrote her books. Ivana gave the deposition, sued, negotiated, published, appeared, and blamed Marla publicly for the rest of her life. Melania's terms were reportedly revised after 2016 to protect her position. Marla is the only one of the 3 who has never told her story, not because she has nothing to say, but because she has more to say than either of them, and is contractually forbidden to say it. And then, slowly, she stopped being a person the story happened to. She raised Tiffany, mostly in California, mostly out of frame. When Trump ran for president in 2016 and the tabloid decade was excavated for parts, she had every commercial incentive and every emotional justification to detonate. Every producer in New York was calling. She went on Dancing with the Stars instead, in the spring of 2016, quick-stepped to Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, and told reporters she was campaigning for a Mirrorball trophy. Trump put out a statement wishing her luck. On the Today Show in 2018, she talked about yoga and a music video shot in India. Asked whether her ex-husband had ever surprised her, she said she chooses not to judge anybody. She mentioned, almost in passing, that they had discussed a presidential run back in the 90s, and that she'd worried about what it would do to his children. She attended the inauguration. She attended her daughter's wedding at Mar-a-Lago in 2022. By 2024, she was telling a London newspaper that she'd been in caregiving mode, that her parents had passed and her daughter was settled, and that she was open to serving if called. You can read all of that as a woman who made peace. Plenty of people do. Here's the other reading, and it's the one the record supports. Silence was the only asset the agreement left her, and she has spent 25 years refusing to spend it. Every year she doesn't publish, the unpublished version gets more valuable, and she stays inside the family. The daughter carries the name. The grandson, born in 2025, is the president's. She never attacked, so she was never expelled. She is the ex-wife with no memoir, no lawsuit, no feud, no quotes, and therefore the only ex-wife whose account has never been discounted, contradicted, or picked apart, because nobody has ever heard it. Now go back to the front page. February 16th, 1990. Those 6 words made her, in the American imagination, a woman who talked too much. Cheap, indiscreet, boasting to her pals. That was the image the country carried for 35 years. And there is a real possibility, supported by a former Post reporter's recollection, and by the plain fact that Trump spent that decade feeding the tabloids stories about himself, that she never opened her mouth at all, that the loudest thing she ever supposedly said was said for her, by him, to sell papers. She spent 1990 being quoted without speaking. She has spent every year since choosing not to speak, which is a different thing entirely, and the only power the contract couldn't reach. In 2018, on a courthouse bench during jury duty, a Post reporter asked her about the headline one more time. She said she never said it. She said someone else did. Then she was asked whether it was true, and she said she wasn't going to talk about that. The truth will come out, she said, just not here. And then she winked. Her father sold real estate in a town of 600 people and served as a county commissioner. And she grew up watching a family that made its living deciding when a property goes on the market. She learned the lesson early, and she has never once broken it. The most valuable thing you own is the one you haven't sold yet.